Hey, if you have a Bible, can you open up to Hebrews chapter 11? We will also be in Genesis, so if you want to find one place, put your finger there. Go find the other place as well. That's what we're doing today. We are spending our summer talking about faith. Specifically, we're asking this question: what does faith look like when it is lived out in the life of believers, of Christians? We are rooting this series. We're actually going to do this all the way through Labor Day weekend, all the way through the first weekend of September. So June, July, August here, first weekend of September. What does faith look like? We're going to use Hebrews 11 as kind of this launching point for us. Hebrews 11, you might have seen this last week, but there's just a long list of names of people from the Old Testament who lived lives of faith. And so each week we're going to pick a different one of the names from here and see kind of what did their life look like. What could we learn about faith from these people in the Old Testament? Now, what I want to do, let me make a distinction for you, because I think words matter. Try to pick my words carefully, and that doesn't always work, because sometimes I say stuff, and you're like, I don't know what he's saying. Those weren't good words. But we called the series Heroes of Faith, not Heroes of the Faith, because the hero of the faith is Jesus. He's our Savior. He's the Redeemer. He is the substance of our faith, right? He is our hero. However, we can see many examples in the Bible and outside the Bible. In this room, we have heroes of faith, those who have lived faithful lives that we can learn from. And so we're going to spend our summer just learning from the lives of some of these Old Testament saints. I think any good teacher would tell you that seeing something done, seeing it happen, is oftentimes a better learning mechanism than a simple textbook definition. You know what I mean? It's like, for example, 2 weeks ago, our coffee pot out there that makes coffee for us in mass production, stopped making coffee. Not good, and we don't have any coffee pot fixers around here, so I tried. So I go over there, I'm flipping buttons, trying to figure it out, literally shocked myself, turned off the power, and then I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with this thing. And so I looked up online this whole owner's manual, and so I'm going through it, reading through this thing, and it's schematics and all this information, the textbook, right? So I'm looking through this. I'm sure the answer's there to our problem, but I can't find it. I don't understand what I'm reading. So here's what I did. This is what you do. I Googled it. And it sent me to a YouTube video, YouTube tutorials, where someone has, you ever do this when you have something to solve, like a car project or something in your house? And isn't it so much better when you watch someone do it? You see them do it, you learn from it. So right away, I watch a video and I'm like, oh, there's the problem. Found it, and actually, I told Bruce he had to fix it. He's an electrician, so I showed him what it was, and he actually fixed it. I was done shocking myself. It happened twice. Fixed it. But there's something, my point is this, there is something, is there not, about seeing it done that we learn from more than just the textbook. And so what I want to do is in Hebrews chapter 11, we get, I think, what would be like a textbook definition of what faith is. And Jeff talked about this last week, so I don't want to rehash it too much. But Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, this is the definition in the Bible of what faith is. It says this: now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Right? We have a hope that we are assured of. We put our faith in that this will come true. We have a conviction about things that we've never seen. This is what faith is. Last week, Jeff said this, kind of gave us a definition for us. He said, faith is confident assurance in the not yet realized. I love that. Faith is the confident assurance of the not yet realized. That is how we ought to live our life. And the question becomes this: what does that really look like, right? Because we can give this textbook definition, faith is confident assurance and not yet realized. But what does that look like in everyday life? What would that mean for you in the place that you're at? In the life that you're living, how would that be expressed? And so if you've ever wondered, what does faith look like in everyday life? I think that this series is going to be helpful. If you've struggled even to understand what faith means, how it can change us not just for eternity, But for today, this is why we're doing this series. Ephesians chapter 2 says, "For by faith we have been saved." We understand this by faith in Jesus Christ, that our eternity is secured. But Paul writes in Romans that we live by faith as well. So there's a faith that gives us something in the future, a salvation, but also you and me, we live our life today by faith. What does that mean? What might that look like? And what we're going to do is we're actually going to see as we look through the different people in this list in Hebrews chapter 11 is kind of like a prism of our faith, if you would. You know how a prism works? Light goes in and it comes out all the different colors. So think of this, like the light of faith comes in, it's a hope of the things, we are assured of the hope, convicted of things that we have not seen. That's what it is, and now we're going to see it played out in the lives of people. This is what faith looks like. So we're going to look at one part of the prism today in this man named Joseph. I wanted to point this out too. In Hebrews chapter 11, as we see this long list, the entire chapter of people, I wanted to highlight this for you. There doesn't seem to be a lot of structure to the list. I don't know if you've read through Hebrews 11 before. Scholars say, man, this isn't in chronological order. It starts here with Abel, which he was at the beginning there. But as you go through it, this isn't actually in chronological order. It doesn't seem to be grouped by themes in any way. It's just kind of it's like the author of Hebrews is like, oh, here's an example of faith. Here's an example of faith. Oh, yeah, and here's an example of faith. And here's an example of faith. So we're going to work through it, and we're not working through in a specific order either. We're just kind of pick some different people to work through for kind of different reasons as it worked out with our preaching schedule and where we'll be. So that's what we're doing this summer. Last week, Jeff kicked off with Abraham, talking about really a faith when the future is unknown. He was told to go, you're going to become a great nation, but all the steps in between that, he had no idea. Just go. Even faith the unknown, hey, go up on the mountain, take Isaac with you for a sacrifice. What does that mean, God? So we learned last week what it looks like to live by faith when we don't necessarily know all the steps in front of us. Today, and I already mentioned this, today we're going to look at the life of Joseph and answer this question. What does faith look like when life doesn't go my way? What does faith look like when life doesn't go my way? Have you been there before? Right, that's called to be human. Life doesn't always go our way. And by the way, I would say this, that this question is even asked from the point of view of man, right? It doesn't go our way, but it very much might be going God's way. But in our experience, it doesn't seem to be going the way that we would want. We say things like this, God has a perfect, good plan for our lives. You ever sat there and thought, God, I hate that plan? You say it's good and it's perfect, but man, I'll tell you what, not the plan that I would want for my life. I wouldn't have chosen to walk through this. Joseph, we're going to see, was a guy who, by human standards, had a lot not go his way. Had a lot of things turn in a direction he did not want to go. And so we're going to think together about life when it doesn't go our way. And we can make a long list here of when life doesn't go our way, from disappointment, the tragedy, from people who maybe your story is like raised in an abusive home and the scars of that just don't seem to go away. Maybe it's financial ruin, even when you like planned so well, but it's just all gone. Life didn't go your way. Maybe it's pain caused by people you thought were friends, but the whispers of the gossipers, and you're like, man, what did I do to deserve this? Life doesn't go your way. Maybe it's getting passed over for a promotion. You thought you were going to get it. You were promised even that you would get it, only to have it pulled away. It's unexpected doctor's visits, broken homes, opportunities missed, addictions that we cannot kick. Life doesn't go our way. What does it look like to have faith in those moments? Hebrews 11, verse 22, this is where Joseph shows up in this long list. And we only get one sentence here about this guy's life. And it says this in verse 22. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. Now, if you know the story of Israel. You go from Abraham last week. He's promised to be a great nation. Abraham has Isaac, and then Jacob has a son named Joseph. Joseph ends up in Egypt. We're about to find out why. And really, what would become the Israelite nation is there in Egypt. And at the end of his life, Joseph says, hey, someday we're going to leave Egypt, and we're going to go back to what would eventually be called the Promised Land. He wouldn't have that language yet. We're going to go back to the homeland that God has promised us. And he says, so take my bones there. And he uses this, the author of Hebrews, to set as an example of faith, because despite Joseph's life, which continually turned the wrong way, he's like, no, but God has still been faithful, and I know what God has promised will be true. Okay, so out of that now, would you take your Bible, would you flip back to Genesis chapter 37? Let's look at this life of Joseph. His life, if you know, is Genesis 37 through 50. So we're not going to look at every verse. In fact, we're only going to look at his life through the lens of faith, okay? How is his faith expressed? There's more to say. We could do a whole series on the life of Joseph, and it could take us a couple months, right? We're not doing that. We get it all here in 30 minutes of his life. Now, the story of Joseph gives us really kind of a framework for you and me of what faith looks like when life doesn't go our way. There's one kind of theological doctrine term I want to start with, because the life of Joseph teaches us something about God and who it is that Joseph put his faith in. And Joseph understood this characteristic of our God. Here's the theological term. It's providence. And let me define that word for you. Providence is this. In all things, God is working to fulfill his purpose in the world. We say this sometimes. Maybe like we might call it luck even. Something kind of turns our way. We're like, well, it's providence. That worked out. I just met you here. I just saw you. I needed to call you. Providence. Right? It's kind of lined up in the right way. What we see in the Bible is that our God, in providential ways, is continually working behind the scenes to fulfill his purpose in the world. I'd point out, he is not working to fulfill your purpose. He's working to fulfill his own purpose. And this word providence, actually, we get it from a collision of some attributes of our God. Let me list three of them for you. The first one is this: sovereignty, meaning God controls all things. Our God is wise, a God of wisdom. He makes no mistakes, right? He knows exactly what he's doing, and our God is good. He has our best interests in mind. When these three characteristics of God collide, what do we get? A providential God who is sovereignly working over your life, who is wise, he cannot make a mistake, and he's good. And so whatever place we find ourselves is the place our sovereign, wise, and good God has placed us, right? And this is what Joseph put his faith in, and what we're going to see is because his faith was in a providential God, it played out in a very real way of living. Providence really, it declares that things don't just happen by accident, that God is working behind the scenes. Let's now. I told you to go to chapter 37, but let me read the very end of his life. You know this one well. Chapter 50, verse 20. Because chapter 50, verse 20, at the end of Joseph's up and down life, he says this: "As for you," speaking to his brothers, to humanity really, which was against him, "as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. And Joseph is describing for us, when he looks back at his life, man, there's a lot of things, evil, that came my way, but God used it in such a way to bring about good. And he actually doesn't mention it was good for me, although we see him in a good spot, but it was good for others. All right, now let's tell the story. Chapter 37, verse 3. It says this: "Now Israel loved Joseph." Israel, his other name is Jacob. This is the father of Joseph. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons. How many sons would Jacob have in the end? 12. 12 sons of Israel. Joseph is number 11. Because he had this son in old age, he made him a robe of many colors. Gave him this robe. It was an important robe, a robe of honor. Verse 4, but when his brothers saw their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. So Joseph comes from this incredible lineage. I already said that, from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, Israel, and now Joseph. Joseph had 11 brothers. 10 of them at least hated his guts. And Joseph was born into an incredibly dysfunctional family. Of these 12, there's actually a girl too. So there's 12 brothers and one daughter. So the 13 kids, Israel, Jacob would have there'd be 4 different moms involved. Only one of which did he love. 2 wives, 2 slaves produced these 13 kids. One of the ladies, Rachel, was the one he loved, in which he had his last 2 sons with, the firstborn of the last 2 sons being Joseph. Thus, he loved and favored Joseph the most. So we got favoritism, the coat of many colors, and then Joseph begins to have these dreams about how he's going to rule over his brothers, and you can imagine his brothers, like this younger brother, he's like, they don't like him. Like, he's favored, he's saying that he's going to be important, and they're not. And so one day, Joseph's father says, hey, go out and visit your brothers, check in on them in the fields. And Joseph goes out, finds out where they're at, he's making his way, his brothers are out there taking care of things, and sees the brother coming, and they come up with this plan. We don't like this guy, let's kill him. That's like the plan. We're going to get rid of him. And then as they're going to kill him, Reuben, one of the brothers, steps in. Look at verse 21. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. Let's not kill him. Verse 22, and Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him. I mean, that's kind of rescuing him, right? Like, don't kill him, but I see a pit. Let's just throw him down there. Okay? That he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. The thought being, maybe I'll come back later and I'll get him out of the pit. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty and there was no water in it. That's an important detail. So there he is down in the bottom. Now, verse 26 says this, then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. So this is the storyline. He's thrown in a pit, and then Judah's like, hey, I got an idea. Let's not leave him here. Let's just sell him off. We'll go back and say he's dead, but he's not really dead. We didn't really kill him, so his blood won't be on our hands. So that's exactly what they do. These traders come by. They sell him 20 pieces of shekels of silver, and he is gone, taken to Egypt. Now, I don't want to minimize what just took place in his life, but clearly life has not gone Joseph's way. Right? And that's just like an understatement, right? Life has not gone his way. He has been sold by his family into slavery. And man, I don't know what Joseph's thinking in this moment, but the betrayal and rejection he feels has to be through the roof, right? These are his brothers. He has been sold off to Egypt. He comes from this dysfunctional family. He's the favored child. He said goodbye to his father not too long ago. He loved his father. And he thought, man, I'm going to return to my father. And now he finds himself stripped of his coat, stripped of his identity. He's a slave headed for Egypt to be lost forever. This is a hopeless situation. It's not just a bad day. It's not like hope tomorrow turns out better for you, man. This is like a life-ruining event. Just a life-ruining event. And the brothers go home and they tell dad, a wild animal killed Joseph. Nothing we could do. And meanwhile, Joseph is dragged off, sold again in a slave market in Egypt. Have you ever been here before? Not in a slave market in Egypt. But have you ever been? Have you ever been here before where a life-changing event took place and it did not turn in the right direction? You've been there? Something took place, your life has turned, and it was not in any way the direction that you wanted. And yet what we're going to see in the story, the providential hand of God is working. And the faith of Joseph to understand that in his circumstance, God is working. His brothers go home, tell dad the story. Now let's fast forward to chapter 39. Chapter 39, Joseph ends up in Egypt. Here's what it says in verse 1. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, we're told who Potiphar is, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, he's a military man, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. Remember, the Ishmaelites paid 20 shekels of silver. They bring him down. Now they sell him presumably for more, and this guy Potiphar buys him. And it says this in verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph. Underline that one. The Lord was with Joseph. He had become a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. It's interesting, and so Potiphar now has him, and he's serving in the house, and we're told that the Lord is with him, comforting him, encouraging him, giving him wisdom, that Potiphar allows him to be in charge of many things, to run his household. Presumably, when he's off like fighting battles, when he's leading the military, he would run the house. However, things are going to take another turn. Look at verse 6, right in the middle of that verse. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. The Bible doesn't always give us descriptions of what people looked like, but he's a handsome man. Verse 7, and after a time his master's wife, so this is Potiphar's wife, cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. I want you to notice again in the midst of that the Lord was with Joseph, and one day Potiphar is doing his military things, and Mrs. Potiphar comes in, wearing her tight jeans, high heels, doing her seductive Egyptian walk. And she says this, come to bed with me. You know, actually in Hebrew, the language is 2 words, sex now. That's the word, that's the phrase. And Joseph says, no, it's against God's law, but also it would be a betrayal of Potiphar, my master, right, who trusted me so much. Mrs. Potiphar, she is ticked off. She doesn't take rejection well. And Joseph runs away, actually, we see in the story. She chases him, grabs his coat. Joseph keeps losing his coat, man. Grabs the coats. Joseph is gone. He runs away. Now Potiphar comes home. Mrs. Potiphar makes up this attempted rape story about him. And Potiphar becomes incredibly angry about it. And Potiphar's going to have Joseph arrested and thrown into prison for attempting to rape his wife. Have you ever been here before? And I don't mean thrown in prison for attempted rape. I mean life has turned the wrong direction even when you lived righteously. Have you been here before? You know, in one sense, Joseph is sold by his brothers, real evil done against him by his family. We may have been there before, life-changing events. Or maybe you've been here before where you were living righteously. You were doing, as the Bible said, attempting to live out our faith in a way that is faithful to the Word of God, and yet still things turn in a direction you didn't want them to go. This is where Joseph finds himself. Now, skip down to verse 20. It says this, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. Verse 21, here it is again, underline it again. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love, chesed love, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Did you notice a theme here? When he's sold into slavery to Potiphar, God shows him favor and he rises. He leads well, right? And here, while he's in prison, he rises in favor again. But he is in prison. That's where he finds himself. And while he is in prison, these 2 other guys show up. The cupbearer and the baker for the king. They're thrown into jail. Both these guys have dreams while they're in prison, and Joseph is able to interpret them. The cupbearer, hey, your dream in 3 days, you're going to get out of here. He's like, oh, but baker, man, within a week, Pharaoh's going to hang you and the birds will pick away at your flesh and eat your eyes out. So good news, bad news. Well, it turns out both things come true. One man's released, one man's eaten by the birds. And Joseph says to the cupbearer, the one who got released, if you could remember me When you go back to Pharaoh, could you just tell him that I'm here unjustly? You can imagine Joseph has told his story. Hey, I'm actually from way over there. My brothers threw me in a pit. I was sold into slavery. Then I'm working for Potiphar. This lady, she's crazy, man. And she's made up this story about me. It's not true. God is with me. I just interpreted this for you. Tell Pharaoh, maybe I can get out of here. Maybe my circumstances will change. But what we'll read in the text is the cupbearer goes back to cupbearing before Pharaoh and forgets about Joseph for 2 years. You ever been here before? Where maybe it's promises unfulfilled, expectations not met, life not what you expected or wanted. It has taken a turn in the direction you did not expect or want it to go. And then what we find is that Pharaoh has a dream. And no one seems to know what it means. Then our forgetful cupbearer remembers Joseph. So Joseph hears the dream and he interprets it. And he interprets it as, hey, for the next 7 years, there's going to be incredible abundance. Crops are going to grow. We're going to have lots of food. It's going to rain and sun. It's going to be great. It's just going to be a huge party almost. However, it's going to be followed by 7 years of drought and famine. There's not going to be any food. And so Pharaoh hears it, and he believes. He's like, that makes sense. This is what the dream is. And Joseph comes up with a plan. He says this, hey, for the next 7 years, let's save some food. Let's store it up. So for that second 7 years, when it's famine and droughts, we can feed people. We'll take care of it, and then we'll survive the next 14 years. And this is what takes place. Look at chapter 41, verse 39. So at the end of this, as we're going through 7 years of abundance, and now we're having time of famine. It says this, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. You're going to be in charge. He rose in Potiphar's house. He rose in the prison, and now here he has risen in Pharaoh's commands. Only as regards the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh's like, I'm in charge, I'm on the throne, and then there's you, dude. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I've set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hands, and clothed him with garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot, and they called out before him, bow the knee. What a change of events. Now people are actually bowing down to Joseph. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. He becomes the second most powerful man in the known world. Things begin to, I guess you would say, work out for him. Then we fast forward 10 years into our story. We're in the middle of the famine, and Joseph's brothers come looking for food. You imagine, right? 7 years, Egypt's been storing up food, but there's a lot of land, other places where people were just living large. They didn't know. They didn't know the dream. They didn't know what was going on. And so they've been eating, and now we're a couple years into the famine, and people are beginning to starve. And so what do? They make the journey into Egypt because they've gotten word, well, Egypt's got food. And so they come, and Joseph is put in charge of how he's going to give out the food, right? This much for these people, this much for this family, this much for them, because Joseph's a wise guy, he's a good leader, he's going to be in charge. And there comes this day, just long story short, when Joseph's brothers come walking in there, and Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize him, though. Right? And this is an important part of the story, but we're not going to dive into it just for the sake of time. Joseph sends them away. They come back. Eventually, though, what we actually see is Joseph forgiving his brothers. Not just forgiving them, though, but inviting them in and taking care of this. So just think about the storyline here. Think about the storyline. He's sold into slavery, works very hard for Potiphar, thrown into prison. He's faithful, befriends a guy there, uses his power to help people, and when he gets a chance for revenge, he doesn't take it. Let me just say this simply. This is faith in action. When we see faith shine into the prism, what comes out is one that when life did not turn his way, was still faithful to God, still believed in a providential God. Now let's wrap up the story, chapter 45. Because of his faith, Joseph is going to interpret his life, okay? Look at verse 3. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph, the big reveal. And the first question he asked, is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. I mean, that's a shocker, right? They've seen this guy for a long time. And all of a sudden, Joseph's there, and he's the one in power, the second most powerful man in the world. I mean, they're scared for their lives. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. And they're like, no, no. But they came near, because he's the second most powerful man in the world. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed or angry. Don't worry, okay? Don't be angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Is that not interesting? It's not that you sold me. It's that God sent me. For the famine has been in the land for these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God, here it is, sent me before you to preserve you a remnant on earth and keep you alive, keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here. You thought you sold me into slavery. No, God did. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler of all the lands of Egypt. You thought you did it, but God was the one who is really working. This is, in biblical terms, providence. God was working behind the scenes the entire time for our good and his glory. Now, here's what I want to do. Let me draw 2 points from this story about our faith. Because really what the story is about is the faith, is what we're learning, the faith of Joseph. So I want you to see what it is Joseph believes, and we just saw how that changed how he lived, right? But if all we did was preach sermons like this, hey, if you have faith, do this, 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 and this, you won't change. That's not how it works. The only way our faith changes us is by believing very specific things, like our God is a providential God working behind the scenes. So let me give you kind of 2 truths about our faith. Let me give you an intellectual truth and a relational truth. Intellectual truth. God has a plan for your place. This is what Joseph believed, that there is a plan of God for whatever place you find yourself in. In fact, we just read it in chapter 45, verse 4, 7, and 8. All said, God sent me. God sent me. God is doing this. These are the words of a man who understands the providence of God. You think you sold me, but God sent me. In fact, if a single link in the chain of events that we just read were to be broken, countless people, including Joseph and his family, all of them would have died. God has a plan for your place. God had a plan. Thrown into a cistern, God is buying time for the traders to come by. Sold into slavery, he needs to get to Egypt. Sold to Potiphar, he learned to work with the Egyptians. Thrown into prison, he met the cupbearer. Forgotten, just wasn't his time yet. He needed to wait for Pharaoh's dream. God has a plan for the place. And by the way, this is not to say that God commands sin or orchestrates sin, because we see a lot of sin in this story. In fact, we know God can't even tempt us to sin. That's what the book of James says. What we do know is this, is that no sin committed against you or sin that you have committed can derail the plans of God, because our God is a providential God, and he is working for our good and his glory. So when you suffer at the hands of another, the acts of another, God has a plan for the place you are in. In fact, Joseph doesn't downplay sin at all. He calls it evil, but chapter 50, verse 20, what man intended for evil, God turned and made good. That's why Paul would write in the book of Romans, all things work out for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So when we're tempted to think that maybe sin done against us, or that our decision to sin has ruined my life, you ever say that before? I've heard that phrase. Man, this happened and it has ruined my life. That quite simply is not true, because God has a redemptive plan. You may not see it, you may not feel it, but because of God's providential care for you, there is a plan for your place. You ever heard the story of Jim Elliot? Guaranteed you have, if you've been a part of church. Jim Elliot, Steve Saint, Peter Fleming, Roger Yoderin, and Ed McClurry. These are 5 missionaries, 1956, killed in South America while visiting this unreached tribe. They go, they want to share the gospel with the tribe kills these 5 men. Life magazine comes out with an article about these missionaries. Isn't that crazy? Life magazine comes out with an article about these missionaries. Here's the headline: Go ye and preach the gospel. 5 do and die. That was the headline. Go ye and preach the gospel. 5 men go, and they die. That's the storyline. But if you know the ultimate story, missionaries would return. In fact, Jim Elliot, who's actually born and raised in Portland, Oregon, by the way, his wife would return to those very people who killed her husbands, and that tribe would come to know Jesus. God was always working behind the scenes. In fact, Ed McClurry, the missionary pilot who was killed, he had landed the missionaries there. He himself is killed. His son would later say that if it wasn't for the death of those 5 men, there's no way that tribe would have responded to the gospel when the wives come back and share Jesus. And by the way, when we talk about the providence of God, this intellectual truth that God has a plan for your place, this is not to say that you will understand that plan. It doesn't mean that you're going to understand it. In fact, the difficult part is that we aren't promised to see or understand, to have all the answers. Now, Joseph, in our story, he does. But there's a whole book of the Bible named after a guy named Job who never gets answers. Now, his life does turn. He ends up, if you know his story, his sons die. His crops and livestock, they're all destroyed. He himself becomes very, very sick. and he will eventually have more kids and get back some of his wealth, but he never finds out why his kids died. He never finds out why he suffered for so long. But God always had a plan, we know, because for us, actually, we were learning what faithfulness looks like in suffering through Job. God has a plan for the place you're in, ultimately because God's perspective is much bigger than ours. Remember we said at the beginning? He is sovereign, He is wise, and He is good. So wherever you're at, it's the right place, it's the wise place, it's the good place, and God is in full control of where you are at. There's a really good little book. It's called A Praying Life by Paul Miller. He said this: often when you think everything has gone wrong, it's just that you're in the middle of a story. I love that. Oftentimes when you just think everything's gone wrong, it's because you're in the middle of a story. And here's the hard part, church. This is the hard part. We just preached through Revelation, so we know this, that we don't always get resolution this side of heaven. He works all things out for good. We may not see that good ultimately until we get to heaven. So here's the thing of faith that we grab onto. God has a plan for your place. You know that, and it changes the way you live. By the way, I think if you believe in the providence of God, it frees you from bitterness, right? Can you imagine Joseph? A man who had every right to be bitter, both at his brothers and of God, but his belief in the providence of God allowed him to choose joy instead of bitterness in the place that he was at. So Psalm 27:13, I will remain confident in this. I will see the goodness of God. I may not see it right now, but I know that God has a plan for my place. Here's the second thing, relational truth. God is present in your place. It's not just that he has a plan for your place, but God is present in your place. I had you underline it in Genesis 39, verse 2, 3, 21, and 23, and God was with Joseph. He was with Joseph. We aren't promised answers, but we are given his presence. God was in the pit, he was in the prison, and he was in the palace with Joseph. And so if you are in a place, life has turned in a direction you did not want, you're in the middle of the story, here's what God is not saying to you today. Stick it out. Trust me, it's a great view from up here. No. He actually says this: let me share in that suffering. Let me bear that burden with you. Let's walk this road together. I've suffered. You are not alone. You're not alone. I go here with you. A couple weeks ago, my family, over Memorial Day weekend, we went to Central Oregon. We went to Smith Rock area. I don't know if you ever hiked around Smith Rock before, but there's this trail there. It's called Misery Ridge Trail. Misery Ridge Trail. It is aptly named, guys. Misery Ridge Trail. It's about 3.5, 4 miles maybe. You start up in a parking lot. Then you have to descend down into like the canyon there. There's a river. It's really pretty. And then once you get down there, then the 3.5 miles actually start. And you climb all the way up, and it wraps all the way around up high on top of these huge rocks where people are rock climbing. Actually really cool to go see. And you walk along the ridge all the way down. You come all the way back around. And so we decide, hey, let's hike Misery Ridge. This is going to be awesome. And Judah, my son, who's 7, he says, no way. I ain't doing it. He wasn't feeling good. So Chris and him stayed back, and I took I took Caden and Piper and Tucker, the 2-year-old. We had a backpack thing, put Tucker in my back, mistake number one. Added, a bunch of weight to me as we're going to climb this thing. So I got Tucker. Caden, she's got the backpack with food because we're going to have lunch when we get to the top of the ridge. That's our plan. This is so we go down out of the parking lot. We're all geared up. Now we start hiking up, and you kind of come up, and there's this kind of plateau area, and we stop, and the trail goes out around. You can't see where it's going, and we're like, oh, we made it to the top. This is great. Let's stop and have lunch. What a great view. So we sit down. Tucker gets out. We're watching him because it's a cliff right there. But we're eat our food, and it's super fun. And I'm taking pictures, and I got a little bit of self-service. I'm sending it to Carissa, we missed you up here. It wasn't that bad. Judah could have done it. This is super fun. And we're okay, we finally finished our lunch. Let's pack back up. We get Tucker back in there. We're all right, let's go walk along the ridge. And it's not even 100, 200 feet, right? Yards maybe. We come around the corner, and then it's whew, you can see the trail. We're only a quarter of the way up. I don't know if it was even a quarter. And it's stair, and then it's gravel, rocks that you take 3 steps and you slip back a step as you're going up. And it's bad because we're going around and people are coming down out of it, and they're looking at us like we're crazy. Right? What are you guys doing? We're going to climb this thing. So but we're going to do it. And so we just start going. There's always this point on a hike, right? The point of no return. You're it's more work now to just turn around and go back. And we're not quitters. So we're going to do this. And we just fight through this thing. Sometimes, so eventually, I'll finish the story. Eventually we get up to the top. Incredible view. We get up there. There's people up there. The view from up there makes that first view like nothing. You see the river going for miles and the mountains in the background, clear sky, just so awesome when we finally got to the top and we were able to walk along there and cycle back down. We got down and we jumped in the river and played in the river and then eventually made it back up and out of there. Sometimes in life, it's we're kind of hiking up this hill and we get to that point and we think we've done it. That was bad, but that wasn't too bad. You ever been there before and you're take a breather and you're okay, now we're going to enjoy life you did it, and then you turn the corner and it's it just got way worse. You know that feeling? That doctor's visit or that relationship thing takes place, just all of a sudden it kind of just all comes crashing in. And not only that, you got a 30-pound kid on your back and you're trying to carry it and get everyone through it. Listen, here's the beauty of it, is that God has a plan for that place you're in. He knew of the hill that was coming and the stairs. And not only that, he says this, I'm going to walk up there with you. I think about my story there. My point is this, Tucker had a pretty good ride. He didn't know of anything that was bad. Now, I felt it in my legs for the next 2 weeks as I'm carrying him, right? But this is what God does for us, right? Could you imagine if we said to Tucker, all right, dude, 2 years old legs, start going. I mean, he'd die. He just wouldn't make it, right? No way he could ever do that. He needed me to carry him. Not only does God have a plan for your place, but he is present in your place. And he carries us through Misery Ridge to get to the top and then be able to see it. And the promise isn't actually that you get to the top and you get to see the beauty. I pray that God, in the midst of sometimes our suffering, those hard times, that you would get glimpses of the beauty and God's plan, but you may not till heaven. And this is why it's faith, that we trust in the providence of God, that we know that he has a plan for my place because he's good and wise and sovereign, and he promises to be right there with us. If we believe those things, it changes how we live. We'll walk and live by faith. The best example of Jesus being with us is actually that God would send his son Jesus, the incarnation, to be born and live among us, that he would live the life you could not live and then die in your place. He suffered. He knows what suffering is, and he bore our sins on the cross.